For a leper, many things are impossible and many other things are easily done. Babalao Chuck said he could fly to the other side of the island and peek at the nuns bathing. And when a man with no hands claims that he can fly, you listen. He would return and tell us about the steam in the nuns' showers, about how they had soap that lathered, how they had shampoo that smelled like flowers. When I came to Chakachakare, it was 1939, and I was only a girl of 14. I came for two reasons. The first was to bury my father, who had lived there for 3 years and only just died. The second was because I had become a leper. It was in my arm. The same arm my mother held with her own hand, said a prayer over before leaving me on the dock, her cotton sari squishing the ground as she ran back to the junction to catch a wagon that would take her to the train, that would take her the whole day to get back to Siparia, way down south in Trinidad. Thought of her sitting for hours, her face against the glass, the hole in her nose empty because she sold the gold to buy me a used red sari and a bag of sweets for the nuns to come get me. My arm was wrapped in a sling, and when the wagon driver had asked, my mother told him I had broken it, and she was taking me to see an Obiaman. I was ashamed because she had made to sin, to tell a lie because of me. And even in my mind, I could not forget how my elbow was hurting me in a funny way that wasn't about pain. Even alone on the dock, I was too afraid to touch it, to give that arm the healing power of the other one. I was afraid to touch places on me that weren't even private. And I was going to die for that, die for having those places. My mother held my hand, and then she left. It was not a parade of white nuns who came for me. It was a lay volunteer, all wrapped in cloth, someone doing community service for a crime committed, or someone doing penance for a sin confessed. Get in the boat, he directed. And I could not tell if he was Indian or African or French. The skin around his eyes was covered in a dark protective salve, and we did not even speak as we motored the 5 miles to Chakachakare. At the Chakachakare dock, he told me to go, and I tucked the sweets under my arm and heaved myself one-handed out of the boat. The boat sped off to the safer, healthy side of the island, and I faced the intake house. It was a welcoming view. Not the color of sores or withered limbs. The walls were blue, a mother's color, and the trimmings were green, the color of life. And I did not think that I would be unhappy here. I presented the bag of sweets to the young nun who greeted me, and she cradled it with her gloved hands and smiled. Then she sent me to bathe in the sea. Hurry, she said, before it gets dark. I knew that the Caribbean Sea could heal many things. If you have a cold, you go bathe in the sea. If you are melancholy, you go bathe in the sea. If you are a leper, go bathe in the sea, but on the leper side. He was there on the beach when I came out of the water. Lazaro was not the name he was born with. He was given that name because he refused to die. He was 16 when I met him that first day, older than me by 2 years, but much smaller in size. I stood a head above him. I had some softness in places, chest and cheek, where he seemed hollow. He had been born in the colony and still showed no signs of leprosy and no signs of leaving. The world would not have him. Surely the leprosy would show soon. In truth, he had nowhere to go. His mother, a Douglas, passed on her mixed genes, and one could not tell if Lazaro was African or Indian. There was talk that there was French in him too, that his father was French, that his father was one of the French priests who came once a week to celebrate the Mass. Who is to know? The Douglas, the mixed race, might be a type of chameleon. They can claim any heritage they desire. They can claim all if they like, though it is true that not all will claim them in return. Is your father to burn him tomorrow? He asked me as he skipped stones into the water. The sun was almost down. My sari, a lovely red, but frayed in places, clung to me and I felt cold. But he wore only a pair of children's short pants. I hadn't thought about my father all day. Well, I've been thinking that they would bury him even though he's Indian. You thinking wrong. Here we all Indian, no matter how much African we have in us. We began to walk back to the surgery where I would spend the night. The nuns, who were our nurses, hadn't yet decided on my treatment and looked over Lazarus' small body. And where are your leper parts? Me? I all leper. But where? He tugged at the crotch of his pants in my head. I expected him to pull his thing out and show it to me shriveled, and I waited anxiously. The next head, you rude girl. He laughed loud enough that I grew ashamed. I'd been staring at his pants. He pointed to his temple. The leprosy is in my mind. On my second day, I watched them push my father's wrapped body into the crematorium. The son who had sent me to the sea, Sister Teresa, stood with her many replicas, their white faces pink with heat, their hair covered in veils with blue bands about the forehead. They were all young enough to be my mother, not like the old dogs at my school in Trinidad who wore huge wing-like headdresses. I didn't understand why they cremated the lepers when they seemed to have so much bare land on the island. And when I asked Sister Teresa, she told me that this was okay because so many of the lepers are Hindu anyway, but it wasn't okay, not really, because my mother is a Christian and she told me that if I went to Chakachakari, the nuns would feed me better than she could and give me medicine that she could not, and that I would be buried under a stone like Jesus. They put me in a one-room house with an old African woman. This is your bed, she said. Yours against the wall, mine beside the door. This so if there's a fire, my old upper legs will have less distance to go. It's also so I could keep my eye on your comings and goings. There's all kind of talk of leprosy ending. And if you go back to your mother, I don't want she to think I've been raising you wrong. Her name was Tanti B. I had never known my grandparents since my mother had sailed over from Madras in southern India before I was born. I knew only southern Trinidad. Tanti B was my grandmother in Chakachakari, and Lazaro was my brother. For the first months after I arrived, Lazaro would take me for walks. The island was green with palm and sea grape trees. It was loud with howler monkeys that snored all day and mated all night. Lazaro and I often went beyond the fence that kept the lepers to the leper side. We would climb under it through a gorge deep enough for a body. First Pagabani Iguana, now maintained by Lazaro. We would climb trees, we would eat green fruit, spit the seeds out, aim for lizards and fire ants. But one day Lazaro took me further than he had before. There, he said, that's the nun burial ground. That's where they put the nuns' bodies. That's where I want to be buried. Well, Lazaro, you ain't a nun. Who said? Lazaro, you are born, you couldn't be a nun. And why I can't be a nun? Didn't Peter take over the family after Jesus died like widows does do? Peter get to be buried under some rock. I want a rock over me too. We climbed down the hill to look at the burial site. The grounds were clean but sharp with ankle-high grass. When we walked, we made a squishing sound, like waves. The stones over the graves were marked, Sister Marie, lover of the Lord. Sister Margaret, lover of the Word. Sister Anne, lover of the poor and the wretched. We sat among the stones, and Lazaro patted my arm gently. Soon they're going to chuck some of your hand away, you know. I know. You afraid? Yes. You brave? Yes. Deepa, what you love? My mother. And who is she? But I hadn't seen or heard from my mother in months, and I had not expected her to write because she had very little schooling. But what was she now? Who was she? Was she a new wife? Was she going to be someone else's mother? Well, she a woman who works in the cane field. She does pray to St. Anne to send her signs. Lazaro was your mother. I already knew of Lazaro's tragedy from the things that Tanti B had whispered to me at night, and the stories Battle Chuck told in the clearing when Lazaro was off helping Holland in the goods on the delivery boat. I knew, but it still seemed the right thing to ask. But I lowered my head so Lazaro would know I did not mean to be bold. My mother, he began, is the woman who told me that I was her miracle. I was her sign. She told me an island could be like a world. Try a next thing, Deepa. Everyone loved their mother. What else you love? I let my good hand run through the sharp grass, feeling the tiny cuts opening on my fingers. I love my own self, I answered at last. Then on your grave it will say, Sister Deepa, lover of herself. What your stone gonna say, Lazaro? Brother Lazaro, lover of Deepa.